I drove 8 hours through a storm to deliver a care package to my sister and her new husband after their twins were born. Exhausted, I knocked on their door, arms full of homemade meals and baby gifts. He answered, his face cold as stone, and before I could speak, he snatched the package, sneered, "We don't need your pity," and slammed the door in my face. Hours later, my sister called, sobbing, saying he'd thrown everything out, except for one thing I'd hidden in the bottom of the box, and when he found it, his world turned upside down. I've always been the fixer in my family, the one who shows up, no matter the distance, no matter the cost. My sister Lila is the baby, 5 years younger, reckless, impulsive, but with a heart so big it could swallow the sun. Growing up, I shielded her from our parents' endless fights, from Dad's drinking, from Mom's icy silences. I was her rock. So when she called me, voice trembling, to tell me she'd had twins with her new husband, Derek, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my car with everything I could think of, casseroles, diapers, tiny onesies I'd spent hours picking out, and drove 8 hours from my small apartment in Portland to their house in the middle of nowhere, Washington. The storm hit halfway through the drive. Rain pounded my windshield so hard I could barely see, and the wind howled like it was trying to rip the world apart. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, but I kept going. Lila needed me. She always had. I pulled into their gravel driveway just after midnight, the house a shadowy outline against the lightning-streaked sky. It was a modest 2-story, the kind of place that looked like it had been loved once, but was now clinging to better days. The porch light was off, and the windows were dark except for a faint glow in the upstairs bedroom. I grabbed the care package, 2 heavy tote bags and a box I'd taped shut with extra care, and staggered through the downpour to the door. I knocked, shivering, my hair plastered to my face. The silence stretched on, broken only by the drumming rain. I knocked again, harder. Finally, the door creaked open, and there was Derek. I'd only met him twice before. Once at their courthouse wedding, where he'd barely said 10 words to me, and once at a disastrous Thanksgiving, where he'd spent the whole meal scrolling on his phone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. But his eyes, they were always cold, like he was sizing you up and finding you lacking. That night, they were colder than ever. "Derek," I said, forcing a smile despite the water dripping into my eyes. "I brought some stuff for Lila and the babies." He cut me off, his voice low and sharp. "We don't need your pity." I blinked, stunned. "It's not pity. It's just, I wanted to help. I drove all this way." He reached out, snatched the box from my arms, and grabbed the tote bags before I could react. The movement was so quick, so aggressive, that I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet porch. "Go home, Mara," he said, his lip curling. "We're fine." And then he slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. I stood there, frozen, as the rain soaked through my jacket. My chest tightened, a mix of shock and hurt and something darker, anger maybe. I'd driven 8 hours for this. I thought about banging on the door again, demanding to see Lila, but the look in Derek's eyes stopped me. There was something unhinged about it, something that made my skin crawl. So I got back in my car, turned on the heat, and cried until my throat felt raw. I was halfway back to Portland when my phone rang. It was Lila, her voice shaky and small. "Mara, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Derek. He threw everything you brought into the trash, the food, the clothes, all of it. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "He what?" "I found some of the onesies in the bin outside," she said, her voice breaking. "They were so cute, Mara. I'm so sorry." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's okay, Lila. It's not your fault." But it wasn't okay. Not even close. And then I remembered the one thing I'd hidden in the bottom of the box, a small locked metal container I'd taped shut and labeled, "For Lila only." Derek wouldn't have known what it was, but if he opened it, well, that was the point. I'd planned for this. The drive home was a blur. By the time I got back to my apartment, the storm had passed, but the one inside me was just beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about Derek's sneer, the way he'd dismissed me like I was nothing. I'd spent years protecting Lila, and now this man, this stranger, was treating her like she didn't matter, like I didn't matter. I couldn't let it go. 2 days later, Lila called again. "Mara," she said, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. "Derek found the container. He pried it open last night and... God, he's been a mess ever since. What did you put in there?" I smiled for the first time in days. Just a little something to remind him who he's dealing with. The container held a letter I'd written, along with a USB drive. The letter was addressed to Derek, and it laid out everything I'd found out about him over the past year. See, I hadn't trusted him from the start. There was something off about the way he isolated Lila, the way he controlled every aspect of her life. So I'd done some digging. It wasn't hard to find the skeletons in his closet, arrest records from his early 20s for fraud, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, and, most damning of all, proof that he'd been skimming money from Lila's savings account for months. The USB drive had copies of everything: bank statements, court documents, even a recorded phone call where he bragged to a friend about keeping Lila in line. The letter ended with a simple warning. "Leave my sister alone, or I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." "He's been pacing the house all day," Lila said. "He keeps muttering to himself, saying he's going to fix this. Mara, I'm scared." "Pack a bag," I told her. "You and the twins are coming to stay with me. I'm driving back now." I made the drive in record time, my heart pounding the whole way. When I pulled up to their house, the sun was just setting, casting long shadows across the yard. The front door was ajar, and I could hear shouting from inside. I grabbed the tire iron from my trunk, just in case, and crept up to the porch. Inside, Derek was yelling, his voice raw with rage. "You think you can threaten me? You think I'm just gonna let this go?" I peeked through the window and saw him holding the letter, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. Lila was on the couch, clutching the twins, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't think. I just acted. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, tire iron in hand. "Get away from her, Derek." He spun around, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. "You," he spat. "This is your doing, isn't it? You think you can ruin my life?" "I'm not the one who's been stealing from my sister," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I'm not the one who's been lying to her for years. That's all you, Derek." He took a step toward me, and I raised the tire iron. "Don't," I warned. "I've already sent copies of everything to a friend. If anything happens to me or to Lila, it all goes public. Your boss, your family, everyone will know." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but he didn't move. I could see the gears turning in his head, weighing his options. Finally, he snarled, "You'll regret this," and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I dropped the tire iron and ran to Lila, pulling her and the twins into my arms. "It's okay," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure it was. "You're safe now." We packed up what we could and left that night. Lila and the twins moved into my apartment, and for a while, things were quiet. But I knew Derek wouldn't let it go. Men like him never do. 3 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was him. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'm coming for you, Mara. You and your sister. This isn't over." I hung up and called the police, but they couldn't do much without proof of a direct threat. So I took matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Derek, and I made sure Lila and the twins were never alone. I wasn't going to let him hurt my family. The payback came a month later. My investigator found evidence that Derek had been planning to flee the country with what was left of Lila's money. We turned it over to the authorities, and he was arrested for embezzlement. The last I heard, he was facing 10 years in prison. Lila and I never talked about that night again, but the scars remained. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring out the window, her face pale, like she was waiting for him to come back. And sometimes, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of his voice echoing in my head. This isn't over. But for now, we were safe. And that was enough.